What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. It is our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizard's website, and we have made it. This is the last week where we will have to be talking about these particular stories. This week we are reviewing War of the Spark Ravnica Ashes by Greg Weisman. If that little intro didn't give it to you, my quick review at the top is, this is the last one. If for some reason you have enjoyed the other ones, sure, read this one. If for some reason you have not read the other ones, don't. And don't read this one either. Just read the book, as we've said, the novel, War of the Spark Ravnica by Greg Weisman. It is infinitely better than this. It gives you much more information, and it is not, unlike this, it is not a giant waste of your time. That's my quick review at the top. Amy, what about you?
I don't know. Overall, I thought this story was probably a bit better than some of the other ones, but I might just be conditioned at this point.
It's a pretty low bar. So, that's our quick review at the top. If you still feel like reading this story because you want to be an informed commenter, or you just are like us and you're going to consume all of Orthos content no matter what it is, we will have a link to that story down in the description below if you're unaware of where to find the story. So feel free to go to that link, click on it, follow it, and you will get to the story itself. Fair warning, it is a lot longer than the ones previous to it, the last 5. So, on to the full review itself. This story was broken up into parts like all of the others, but I had mentioned in one of the previous reviews that we did that most of them had 4 parts. And there was like one that went to like 6 or 7 or something like that. This story had 11 parts. That's too many.
Yeah.
And the quick and easy answer to that is split it up. Split it up between 2. You would have 5 parts and 6 parts, or 6 parts and 5 parts if you split it. And that's more than the average or the norm for what most of these are.
Right.
It's not that hard. It's math. It's counting. But for some reason, they married themselves to 6 weeks, even though I was saying to Amy before we filmed this that you would think that, like, if it was 6 weeks, in the past we've seen stuff like that, where it's 6 weeks and it's because the 7th week, right, as soon as they're done, they're going to start in on the next set of stories,
right,
like the M20 stories or whatever, the Core Set 2020 stories. But that's not the case here. We still have another novel coming out, and we have already started receiving the chapters from The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler. We started receiving those last week, and we got another chapter 2 this week. So they're already overlapping. So it's not like they're trying to finish this up so that they can start the next thing, because the next thing's already started, and we already know when the other thing is coming out. So it's just it just continues on with the nonsense, the complete lack of understanding and nonsense. But I don't really want to harp on that too much, because I think everybody knows at this point that these days it just makes no sense. And I don't know how I can attempt to make sense of it, because it just doesn't make sense. And I think, to be honest, I think Wizards knows it makes no sense, because they've had Doug Beyer coming out and talking to people on Twitter and being like, yeah, it would have made sense if we'd released the prequel stories prior to the main story, but it just didn't work out that way.
Really?
Yeah. So
I never would have thought.
Yeah. He's like, it just didn't, we wish it could have worked out that way. It could have worked out that way. You just have to plan better.
You had actually planned it.
And not him specifically. I don't mean to
Right.
throw
Just
Doug under the bus, because Wizards...
any and all.
Well, and because Wizards already did that. They were like, you go talk to them. And it's like, somebody talk to somebody.
Right.
What the hell's going on? So I respect Doug for coming out and actually telling us something, despite the fact that then when he answered the question and was responded to by 50 other questions, I feel like it kind of clammed up after that, because there's only so many questions you can answer before the answer just is, look, we screwed up and we know it, and it's bad. So that's not this story, and there's enough of this story to talk about, so I apologize. But I'm going to go part by part, because it's really easy to do this part by part. So first of all, part one, Amy, I will turn it over to you. Do you want to talk to everybody about exposition?
Okay. While he was reading, I'm going, okay, this story is supposed to be from Rat's point of view, and I say it every week, and I'll say it again. It's not from Rat's point of view.
It was the worst this week.
It was just exposition spat up at us.
Part one was the worst because it was just like a recap of everything that's come before.
Right.
Even though it's part
like, yeah,
6.
we read the other ones, thanks.
Yeah. It's part 6. Like, who... I kind of touched on it at the beginning, but who comes in at part 6 and is like, man, I better know what happened to the last 5 parts?
Especially after the glowing reviews we've been giving the other stories that came before part 6.
Been real bad. real bad. Yeah, it's not like it's been great for the first 5 and somebody's like, dude, you gotta read these, and then part 6 comes out and somebody's just like, oh, this is the one that's out today? Sure, I'll read it.
Right.
No.
Not like that.
Not at all, in like the opposite of that. And then the stuff that I complain about the most. So part 1 was filled with exposition, hence why I cut to Amy there for a second. Copy and paste, like tons of copying and pasting. Right. And then, like, 3 lines of new dialogue.
Oh.
Out of, like, the whole part. Just, like, 3 lines. I don't remember what they are. I didn't write them down, but it's, like, 3 lines of, like, new information. It would have been cool
if they had been memorable enough where you wouldn't have to write them down. Because it'd be great if they were memorable enough for that. Because then we would have some bit of the story that is memorable in any respect other than just to hate ourselves because we're remembering the same exact language just being superimposed into these stories.
Mm-hmm. Then we're on to part 2. Spoilers, by the way, for this review. These parts, like the descriptions and the reviews of these parts, they're going to be very similar. So, for example, part 2, now that we've finished with part 1, part 2 is copied and pasted language and 3 new lines of dialogue. That's it. This time it's 3 new lines of dialogue of thoughts both from Rat's perspective and like a sentence from Dak Faden as well. Of him like talking to himself as he walks away. Part 3. A few lines in the beginning of part 3 are her talking about the coming fight. So that's new information because it's her mentality going into that fight, which is interesting. And I enjoyed hearing that because she's talking about how she would be safe, arguably, because the Eternals can't see her and she doesn't have a spark. So she's probably the safest out there. And then people like Hikara and her parents and stuff are also somewhat safe because they can't be killed with one touch of a hand.
Right.
But they're still in danger. But more importantly, people like Teo and Kaya, who she's very close with, they are the most in danger. And she even mentions, which I thought was actually arguably interesting, she mentions that she's very concerned about going into this fight because there are very few people in her life who she cares about. And if any of them die, that would be a huge loss for her. Whereas everybody else doesn't notice that she exists and isn't aware of her existence. And these people are aware. And so if they go away, it would be a huge blow to her because she has so few people who know her and can see her that she doesn't want to lose any of them. That's good. That's good information. Too bad it's the first 3 sentences of like 2 or 3 paragraphs for part 2, or part 3, excuse me. And then it becomes copied and pasted dialogue that they inserted her into. Because they can. Because that happened so much in this story. I feel like in this story in particular, they shoehorned her in to places where she didn't belong.
Yeah.
At least in the past, the novel said that she was in those places. Here, it didn't. Here it was like, Jace and Gideon are over here talking with Chandra behind Isperia. Later on, we find out that Dak Faden is there as well, hiding on top of Isperia. But then in this short story, Rat goes, I'm going to go listen in because I'm curious. Okay, sure, they can't see you. So
Right.
technically the novel wouldn't have told us that you went there because it's being told from like Jace's or Chandra's perspective, so they can't see you. So it's not even like it's from Kaya's perspective, so Kaya could say, oh, I saw a rat walk over near where Jace and
Right.
Gideon and Chandra were. Right? It's just from Jace or I don't remember exactly who this particular portion, I think it's Chandra, but they go over and they don't mention it in the novel, and so now in this short story it's super easy for them to be like, and I followed them to eavesdrop because they can't see me.
Right.
It's like, okay, so you've written a character who can be a camera for you.
Right, exactly.
That's all you did.
So that you can pretend that things are from her point of view when they're really not. It's just a narrated thing.
And again, not even narrated. It's just, she goes, I'm going to go over that way and eavesdrop. And then you get to just copy and paste everything that already happened. That's it. No change in description, and we'll get to that later, because, my God.
She's a camera, so it would stay the same.
Yep. Well, but it wouldn't. Because the description that we got in the chapter was the description that Chandra would have given, not
Well, I know, that's why I'm saying
a
she's
soulless camera. Yeah, it still would have been different, but regardless, that's part 3. Then we're on to part 4. Rat's on the battlefield, but she's only on the battlefield so that they can copy and paste the information from the battlefield. But there's a line in there that explains it all away. It's all forgiven. Don't worry. She has an axe now. And she talks about how she has an axe now. So that's a reason for her to be on the battlefield and for it to be from her perspective as opposed to a narrator, because she was given an axe by her mother and she doesn't know if she could lift that axe. Aren't you so riveted?
Yeah.
She has an axe now. Why? I'm just so mad. It's so annoying. It's so annoying because it literally is, that portion of the story is, for me, like, that's the kind of thing that I love, right? Is like large fights like that where you can see like, and then Karn's over here and this is how he's killing things, and Soren's over here and this is how he's killing things. I wrote some notes for part 4. I don't remember. This is like the most basic, and it can be pretty easily explained away by me just not remembering. I don't recall if there are vampires on Ravnica. Seems pretty logical that there might be, or that vampires as a concept exist on Ravnica. That's fine. So when Rat says, oh, a vampire planeswalker is ripping heads off, because when Dak is giving the play-by-play from his perspective, he knows that they are Soren and Nahiri. And so he's talking about Soren and Nahiri. She doesn't know that they are Soren and Nahiri. She's never met them before.
Right.
She being Rat, of course. So her response is to call them a vampire planeswalker and a core planeswalker. Okay, so let's say she knows what a vampire is, because vampirism is, even in pop culture, could be just a thing, right? That either vampires exist or they're known about. How does she know what a core is? Where are the core on Ravnica? When have there ever been core on Ravnica? And again, if I'm wrong, that's fair. But you can't tell me that that's not been a problem in the past, and so that's why I'm bringing it up now. How does she know what a core is? She could have just said a pale woman.
Yeah.
Right? Or a white-skinned, like a powdery white-skinned woman. Like something, description of some kind. Because, sure, you're nodding to us that, yep, we know it's Soren and Nahiri, thanks. But you're not. You're just doing that because that was the point in the novel where they were explained as to what they were doing. Rat doesn't care. Rat wouldn't know that.
Right.
Also, when she describes Dak Faden's death, you made a point, and I had thought of it as well, but you made it, so I'll let you take over and talk about it. There was that moment where Dak is dying and he raises his sword, and the line says, raising his sword to cut the arm off of the Eternal. Right?
And then it goes, well, but he was too weak to do it, so it didn't work. And I'm like, well, if he was too weak to actually lift his arm with the sword to cut off the Eternal's arm, then how do you know that that's what he was doing?
Mm-hmm. Like, raising the sword? Sure.
Like
raising the sword to stab it?
You can see him, like, try to go like this or whatever, and then he can't. But you don't know what he intends to do with that arm once he's raised it, right? Unless you see him do it. I mean, maybe you could argue because she's slightly psychic that that's why, but we haven't really seen any actual evidence of her being slightly psychic, I feel like.
She's told us, Amy.
Well, yes, these stories are very good at telling, not showing.
Yeah, because they have to.
So.
Because she's not a real, like, character in these stories.
Exactly.
She's just there.
She's the camera.
So that's part 4. And then they're on to part 5. Part 5 has one solid line of her personality when she explains why she kept protecting Hikara despite the fact that Hikara didn't know that she was there. She talked about that, and that was interesting for that one line. So for like one line, I was like, oh, cool. Back to copying and pasting. And I literally wrote, otherwise copy and paste and info she shouldn't know. Just things that she just has no basis of knowledge for, but because that was in the novel, they just copied and pasted the, I did this from, you know, if it was from Kaya's perspective, and put, I saw Mistress Kaya do this.
Right.
No, you didn't.
It's just like,
I knew she felt this way. No, you didn't. Like
all they did was just take all the same information from the novel and then say that there was a character who was sort of invisible and sort of a mind reader and really stealthy and
yep.
You know, good at sneaking around and spying on people and listening in. And they were like, okay, well, so since we've created this character, we can just tell the story from her point of view because she just knows everything because
yep.
she's just able to, you know, be sneaky, and that means she knows everything. Like,
yep.
It's such a cop-out. It's so lame. It's just not good.
Nope.
It's not good.
So then we move on to part 6. Part 6 is just copying and pasting. And we've talked in the past about the fact that the way that Rat talks, she calls people Mistress so-and-so or Ms. so-and-so or Mr. so-and-so. And I will say there is a point in this story where that gets tiresome, but it's not until like part 11. So they did a really good job of delaying that as much as possible. Like, she still calls people that, but there isn't like a large mass of people enough where that becomes a problem until like much later into the story, whereas last week it was like really towards the beginning and it was really tiresome like right at the beginning, so that was frustrating. But in this story we have something different. We know that Rat knows Liliana's full name. Yeah. Is Liliana Vess. We know that because she was in meetings and group meetings or whatever you want to call them, gatherings, where they discussed the plans
Magic
of...
the Gathering.
Wow. I knew you were going to go there. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm sorry. Good job, but I'm sorry. I appreciate it. But also I don't. But I appreciate it. So yes, there were...
It's okay. I hate myself just as much as you all do.
There were groupings of planeswalkers and guild members and Ravnicans and etc. planning what to do. And one of the things that they were planning was taking care of Liliana Vess. And they mentioned Liliana Vess is her name, right? So Rat knows that that's her name. Prior to that, whenever she saw her, or at least said that she saw her so that, because the novel mentioned Liliana, so Rat has to mention Liliana.
Right.
Whichever you prefer, right? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Right.
She would call her Ms. Ravenhair because she has black hair, it's the color of a raven. Sure, that's fine, because Rat has some cute names for things like the Eternals are creepies and the God Eternals are God creepies. Like, it's fair. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But in part 6 and all the way to the end, it's like they flipped a damn coin as to what she was going to call Liliana.
Yep.
Ms. Ravenhair, Ms. Vess, Ms. Liliana Vess. It was all of them. At any given time, in one paragraph, it would be Ms. Ravenhair, and then in the next sentence is Ms. Vess. Pick one. If you're going to control F and just replace everything, just do that. You're clearly doing it every other way anyway.
Well, maybe they decided to try and be less repetitive by changing up what they called her enough times.
It made me...
So that they could continually talk about her and not refer to her as her, refer to her as her name, but various names so it wasn't so repetitive, even though it still is.
No, it made me want to rip my eyes out. Just throwing that out there. Yeah. It really made me want to rip my eyes out. It was the worst. And this is still part 6, so then there was just more copying and pasting. Okay. On to part 7. This pissed me off to no end. In the novel, when you have the moment where Gideon is shot off of Gideon's Promise, the Pegasus, and he falls.
Wait, that's the name of the Pegasus?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
We learned that from Aurelia towards the beginning of the story, when she gives him the Pegasus back.
That's so dumb.
I think it's cool.
It's a stupid name for a Pegasus.
Okay. So, I mean, I would disagree, but that's a fair point.
Fair enough.
So, when that moment happens, originally it's from Liliana's perspective, because she's the one controlling Oketra and shooting the arrow and hitting the Pegasus. When Gideon falls and everybody's hopes are dashed or whatever, then it's from Jace's perspective. And Jace sees Rakdos come up with Gideon on his head. I was going to say back, but nope, it's his like forehead thing.
Forehead thing?
And Jace is describing Rakdos from Jace's perspective. And he says, right, it's in the novel, it's supposed to be this tension-building moment where you're like, giant, fire first, then smoke, or smoke, then fire, or whatever, coming up from below. Giant, demonic, Parun, guildmaster, demon, right? All of those things are said with periods in between them. It is to build tension, and it's because Jace is seeing Rakdos. Now, Jace, I cannot quote to you exactly if and when, but I'm relatively certain as the Guild Pact, at one time or another, Jace had seen Rakdos before. I cannot guarantee it, like I said, but I'm pretty sure that is the case.
Likely.
Regardless, it is a huge moment, and it is really cool that happened.
Yes.
But in no way would Rat give the exact same description in her mind as Jace did in his. There is no way.
Especially seeing as how she's a lot closer to Rakdos than Jace is, because
she's close to Hikara,
right.
She lives on the plane, she's considering joining the Rakdos cult.
Right.
That's one of her 3 options. So Rat would not sit there and go, giant, demonic, leathery winged or bat winged or whatever. She wouldn't give the exact description. You're just copying and pasting.
Right.
And in all the other moments, it's dialogue. We've talked about this a million times. It's dialogue. I get it. It has to be that way. This was the worst offender, because it was such an impactful moment in the novel, because it was the reveal of Rakdos.
Right.
Excuse me, my goodness. It was the reveal of Rakdos. It was the big moment. Gideon riding a damn demon, standing in the fiery eyebrow fire, or whatever you want to call it, on Rakdos' head, flying up to take on Nicol Bolas. And Jace is the one describing it because it's his friend. He cares. He sees that, and it gives him hope where he thought all hope was lost.
Right.
And now Rat's doing it too, because you should know it in these stories too, guys.
Camera.
But it's not a cam. That's my point. Like in this, it wasn't a camera because it was the exact description Jace gave.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It is a camera. It's literally recording it. It's recording not even the instance as it's happening. It's recording the previous story. It's recording secondhand. It's recording the story that's been told about what has occurred.
Yeah.
It's really sad.
Yeah. And then, to top it all off, the cherry on top, right? This part ends the same way that chapter ended, with Gideon flying through the air, plunging Blackblade down to try to kill Nicol Bolas, hit Nicol Bolas, whichever. And Blackblade shatters on Bolas's brow, and he falls, and with him falls the hope of all Ravnicans. You want to know why I know that line so well? And I'm sure I messed up a word or two here and there. I'm not guaranteeing it's a quote because I didn't write it down. But I don't think I needed to, because it sure was the last line in that chapter in the novel. And it sure was the last line in this part in the story. Because copying and pasting. But also, right, that was part 7. Cut there. Have that be the end of this story for you. And then come back next week and do 8, 9, 10, and 11. It would be 4 parts then. So this would be the longer one, right, where it would have 7 parts. But then next week you could go back to a 4-parter, close it nicely, neatly, have like a reasonable length of a story. But it at least leaves it on the cliffhanger of all cliffhangers of, oops, Gideon fell, Blackblade's broken, guess we can't kill Bolas now, wonder what we'll do. And so for anyone that isn't aware of the story through the cards or through the novel or through any other means, so that's going to be the end of that part. Let's move on to part 8. And part 8. So, first of all, the other thing I wrote is now she's calling her Ms. Liliana Vess. Again, I mentioned that earlier, that she just switches from Ms. Ravenhair to Ms. Vess, now to Ms. Liliana Vess, like just her full name for some reason. But more importantly...
For all the reasons.
This is the part where Gideon saves Liliana, and Rat is kind of describing all that she's seeing, despite the fact, and I will talk more about this later, but despite the fact that she is at the bottom of the Citadel, looking all the way up to the top, which, by the way, have we seen the picture from Storm the Citadel? The Citadel is huge. Rat is not on the Citadel at all. So she is at the bottom of the Citadel, looking at the top of the Citadel, where Liliana and Gideon both are, as well as Nicol Bolas, obviously. And
She has a perfect vantage point.
Perfect. Sees Liliana disintegrating away. And there are a couple times where the story even says, because they can't explain it away, like, oh, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it looked like this. Or I couldn't quite make out the details, but this is what happened. Okay, that's somewhat fine. Like I said, we'll talk about that later. But she mentions, in regards to Gideon and Liliana, it just says that she's like, someone mentioned, or I overheard while I eavesdropped, that they were friends once. No, you didn't. No, you did not. You did not. You never, ever overheard that they were friends once. Nope. You didn't. The only reason that you have that information in there is to give exposition, as Amy pointed out earlier correctly, so that people have an understanding as to why Gideon might save Liliana if these are the only stories that you're reading ever in the history of magic, which, by God, help that person if they have only read these stories, because
they will never read another.
Nope, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. You overheard they were friends once? How dare you? Like, screw you.
Please.
Like, it really, at that point, it's insulting. It's like, well, you guys are clearly idiots, and so we're just going to throw this line in there because we need to justify it having this information in here somehow. I would have preferred, like, in parentheses, it say, like, editor's note, if you were unaware, Gideon and Liliana used to be friends.
Right?
I would have 100% preferred that shit. Because I'm a comic book reader and I'm somewhat used to some of that, where it's like, this happened back in issue whatever. That's fine. But not that throwaway garbage line of, I overheard it, well, I eavesdropped it once. No, you didn't. We've been with you every moment since all of the Planeswalkers came to Ravnica. So we would have known that you would have overheard this. No, you didn't. And how dare you for trying to throw that line in there to make that other line make sense.
No.
Absolutely ridiculous. I was so mad when I read that part. Also, we get to talk about in part 8, it is the third time that it happens. So the first time I thought it was a typo or a grammatical error. The second time I thought it was odd. The third time it just made me angry.
Oh boy.
It's when...
I embrace myself.
Well, you know this. We were talking about it earlier. It's when Rat's talking and uses the phrase, whatever what.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like it's a typo. It looks like they left the word what in there because they were trying to type the word whatever. And they put a space, and it you use spell check or something, and spell check called you out for misusing or misspelling whatever, and so you clicked change to whatever because that's what you wanted, but the word what stayed after it. But it happened 3 times in this story alone. And to my knowledge, to our knowledge, as we were talking about, it has never happened before.
Right. It didn't seem like, okay, this is the way Rat talks, so it makes sense for it to be in here. She's never spoken like that before.
Nope.
And it's not like it's all of a sudden now from somebody else's point of view.
Nope. Well, it was never really from Rat's point of view, though. Exactly. That's what we've been saying this whole time. For 6 weeks, in fact, we've been saying that. But yeah, whatever what was in there 3 times for no reason. I encourage you, you know what, I don't encourage you, do not go back and look for it. I trust us on this one, if you will. Trust me, it was there. And again, the first time I brushed it off. I didn't even write it down. Because it's like, you know what, typos happen here and there. Like, if it happens enough times and it takes me out of the story, I will talk about it, and I have in the past. Because that just means it's poor editing. Right. You just don't have a good editor. But if there's one typo or one grammatical error in an entire short story, I let it slide. If there's 2, probably the same thing. If there's like 3 or 4, like now you're taking me out of the story multiple times.
Right.
This time it's the same thing though. It's the exact same issue.
It's not a typo. I think it goes back to what that other person mentioned. That just like the weird eccentricities that Greg Weisman has just keep bleeding into this writing, even though there's no reason for it to be there.
Well, that's like what I was mentioning, right? Is that the first time you hear something, for example, the description of Rakdos, right? The description of Rakdos, the first time we heard it in the novel, was Jace's description, right? And so we put that on Jace as a character describes Rakdos that way. Right. Once Rat describes Rakdos that way, now both of them were Greg Weisman doing it. Both times. It ruins it. It takes you out of the experience entirely if that is how you read stories, right? If you were able to be immersed all the way through, congratulations, because I wish I could do that.
Right.
I wish I could still do that. But I can't. When I see whatever what 3 times in a story and none of them make sense, like the third time, when it happened the third time, that was when it like most closely came to possibly meaning something maybe. But that was after it being used the first 2 times and making no sense at all. None. It was the most frustrating. It was super frustrating.
Right.
Part 9.
It's as if there were no editors looking at this.
None. Nope. Part 9, pretty simple. I just wrote that there was nothing of Rat here at all. It was just an entirely copied and pasted part. Move on to the next one. Part 10, holy crap, we got some information in part 10. Holy crap, some actual information that mattered.
Yes.
Because Rat talked about, although again, in the novel, it talked about the Wanderer planeswalking away first, after Liliana, of course, after the immortal sun was turned off. Lily goes first, then the Wanderer, and then they mention like Jiang Yanggu and the other planeswalker whose name I'm not going to remember right now, but you know what I mean from the Chinese series, and in this one, not in the novel, but in this story, it mentions that Rat notices that the dog, the three-legged dog, who we know is Mowu, but she doesn't, so she mentions Jung and the three-legged dog that they brought with them.
He only has 3 legs?
Oh, sorry, 3 tails.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was like, wait a minute.
Sorry.
What?
Sorry. Yeah, 3-tailed dog, Mowu. She mentions that Mowu turned to stone right before they left. And at first, I thought this for like a half a second, and then you, when I explained it to you, you thought it as well. We thought that it was Vraska, that somehow turned this dog to stone.
I was like, why?
Yeah, exactly.
What?
And yet, then I realized what happened. That's how Mowu can travel through planes with Jiang. Because Mowu can become an object instead of an animal or a living being. Because inorganic matter can be transported by planeswalkers, not organic matter. So if I'm a planeswalker and Amy's not, I can't hold Amy's hand and walk to a new plane with her. But that playmat that's sitting over there, I can hold that in my hand, planeswalk, and it will be on the other plane with me because it's not alive. So when Mowu turned to stone, now Jiang can grab onto Mowu, be in the other plane, and then turn Mowu back into a dog again.
Right.
That's so cool.
Right.
And that's a new, at least for me, that's a new piece of information.
Right.
If there was other lore that came out about Jiang that I was unaware of that gave that information, well, to me, this was new information.
Right.
So to me, that was interesting because notice how they showed us, they didn't tell us.
Right.
So Rat didn't go, I guess that's how they planeswalk together, is that he turned to stone. Nope. She just said the dog turned to stone before they left. And then we were able to sit here and go, got it, get it now, makes sense.
Right.
We
because
learned
the whole time
something.
Earlier, we were like, how does Mowu planeswalk?
Right, and it was a fair question.
He's not a planeswalker,
Right.
he's a dog.
Right, and so we kind of just brushed it off because what else were we going to do, right? This story actually taught us something.
Yeah. It's cool
Once.
when that happens.
One line was worthwhile in this whole thing. And that was part 10. On to part 11. I think this was earlier. This may have also been in part 10. But I wrote it in part 11 as well. But we talked about this a moment ago, and I said I was going to come back to it, and here we are. Rat is at the bottom of the Citadel, in the streets of Ravnica with all the other fighting planeswalkers and etc.
In the middle of the commotion.
And there are a few that are up top, right? There's Lily, there's Gideon, there's Bolas, there were the 2 God Eternals left, Bantu and Oketra. But by this time, Gideon's dead, Bolas is disintegrated, both of the God Eternals are gone, Bantu exploding from withdrawing all the sparks, and Oketra being obliterated by Nicol Bolas, so Liliana is the only one left. And what we know from reading the novel, and from seeing the cards, and etc., the Soul Gem, or not the Soul Gem, that's from Marvel, sorry everyone, the Gem of Becoming, in between Nicol Bolas's horns, falls when Nicol Bolas disintegrates. And it bounces, and it lands by Liliana, and she picks it up, and she planeswalks away. Now, we know that because we've read the novel.
Right.
If you read this story, you know that too. Why? Because Rat has weirdly the worst and best eyesight in the world at the same time in the same story. Because when Nicol Bolas and Gideon and Liliana and etc. were up there, Rat says, couldn't quite make out the details, but, you know, something happened up there. And yet she can see the Gem of Becoming fall to the floor, bounce, because she describes the bounce, and sees that it lands at Liliana's feet. And yet later on, she then says, she sees Liliana bend down to do something or pick something up, and then she planeswalks away. How can you see the gem fall, but then you can't describe that that's what she picks up off the ground?
You can see the gem fall, bounce off the floor,
And land at her
and
feet.
land at her feet, even though you are on the ground and she is at the top of the citadel.
So do some math in terms of even if she were far away, right? This is how you get into, triangles and a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But that diagonal line to get you to that ziggurat, you'd have to be so far away to actually be able to see detail of what's going on at the top of the citadel. Otherwise, if you're lower, you're not going to see what's on the ground or the floor or the base of that citadel. That's just not how perspective works.
Right.
You have to be so far away.
Which means that you won't see it because your eyes aren't that good. Unless you're literally using a telescope.
Yep. So the perspective is garbage. It's garbage here. It's only there because they want us as readers to know that it happened. Okay. Sure. I guess. But also no. Right, let's throw that out there as well.
No.
Also no. Very much no. In part 11, there is some more actual information. There is actual information from Rat on how she feels when Hikara is talking to Teo, and Teo says, "Hey, don't you remember your friend Rat?" And then Hikara thinks about it for a bit, and then is like, "You know what, I don't even remember what she looks like." And then Rakdos shows up and takes her away before she can actually get into trying to see Rat, because Teo's like trying to point her out. And that makes Rat upset, and she talks about that for like 2 lines, maybe. When I read that part in the book, since I knew that these stories were a thing at that point, I was actually interested. I was curious about what Rat would say. Well, it doesn't matter what Rat would say, because that's not why she's here.
Right.
Clearly, that's not why she's here.
She's here to chew up and spit out the same garbage we've already read.
To people who apparently didn't want to buy the book, I guess. But the book is so much better than this. It sucks. And then we have the last point that I wanted to make before we talk about these stories overall, and this story overall, and these stories overall. She calls it the War of the Spark. What? Why? If anything at all, she would call it the War of the Sparks, plural, because that's what happened. We all know that would make more sense based on what's going on, but she calls it the War of the Spark. And not only that, but when you're reading it, the first the word war, and the word spark are all capitalized. Why?
Because it's a title.
Yes, it is. And it further cements the point that Rat was never a character.
Right.
Ever. She was not a character. She was the camera and Greg Weisman smashed up into a little character thing that isn't a character.
It's an imitation.
That exists
A
solely.
bad imitation.
That exists solely so that these stories can exist, with telling you about what happens in the book, but only parts of what happened in the book, and like gloss over most of it.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this earlier, this story was the longest story by far, and it was so that they could cram it all in. All of it. And I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah.
I just don't. Amy, I didn't mention to you that I was going to do this, but out of curiosity, if you had to rank these stories as a whole, all 6 of them, right? Because we're done with these now. Thank the Lord above.
Yeah.
If you had to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst magic stories we've ever read, and 10 being the best magic stories we've ever read, how would you rank these?
One.
I would have maybe been nice and said 2.
Yeah, but
Maybe.
But what magic stories have we read that could possibly be lower
Oh,
than it?
well, that was what I was going to say. That does not imply that saying 2 means that there is a magic story that falls on 1. I'm not asking you to rank them. I'm just asking you to categorize these
Because
stories.
what I just did in my head was I thought about the stories in the past that we have complained the most about.
And there have been a few. There are a few that stick out.
Yeah, there are a few that come to mind.
1 or 2 from Eldritch Moon.
And they are certainly at least 2 notches above any of these.
Wholly agree. These were awful. And again, I'll say it again because we've been saying it for a while. Please do not equate our reviews of these stories to our feelings about the novel, because those are very different things.
Correct.
And we will get to that, and we are looking forward to bringing those opinions to all of you.
Right.
So please definitely stay tuned for those. But for now, that I agree. I agree with you entirely. Like I said, I might say a 2 out of 10, because there was some redeeming information in here occasionally. It was, I'll repeat it as I've said in the past, it was copied and pasted, it was lazy, it was a cash grab, despite the fact that you won't make a lot of money, but it was for congratulations, genuine congratulations to Greg Weisman. Because I wish I could get paid for doing nonsense like this. My God. It's very, very frustrating to me.
Part of me feels like how poor this is was just on purpose. It was a way for them to show fans that they need to spend the money on something like the novel if they want to get any kind of quality from the story.
Well, I guess the thing that bothers me is that if they haven't read the novel, they wouldn't know. They might just think, and I know that there are many people out there who have very strong negative opinions about the novel. Spoilers for our review, we are not those people.
No, we're not.
I'm not going to say it's the best thing I've ever read in my life, but I do not have as strong of negative opinions as I've heard out there. I am not saying that those people are wrong or that their opinions are wrong. It's something that we can discuss at a later date. But it's these stories, if you haven't read the novel, or if you heard maybe those glaring reviews and you chose not to purchase the novel and you were like, well, I'll just read these stories instead, you may feel like your opinion that was generated through the opinion of others about the novel is now justified having read these stories.
Right.
And that's a damn shame.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't blame you for feeling that these stories would translate to how good or poor the novel is, because it's written by the same author and it's featuring some of the same characters. Hell, it's featuring half the same text.
Right.
Most of it's exactly the same damn text. It's just so much worse somehow.
Yeah.
So much worse. So it frustrates me. It frustrates me to no end that these exist at all.
Right.
Because if you had added the dialogue in these 6, or the information, whatever, dialogue, descriptions, what have you, thought processes, from these 6 stories that were different from what was in the novel, maybe you would have gotten 10 more pages.
Right.
In your book. And in the grand scheme of things, as opposed to a 360-page book, I would not have cared about a 370-page book.
Right.
In fact, I probably would have, well, I definitely would have preferred it to having to do this.
Right. 100%.
And so, if you joined us in reading through all 6 of these, please let us know in the comments. If you joined us in our reviews of all 6 of these, but you didn't read them, let us know in the comments. However you interacted with these stories, whether you read the novel, didn't read the novel, read these stories, didn't read these stories, I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious what you all thought of these stories, because if you liked them, as we've said without any and all of these, right, the comment section has seemed to agree with us, for the people that have commented, that these are poor.
Yeah.
Like piss poor. The writing is poor, the half-assing is obvious. That's what it seems to be agreeing with us. If you have a counter opinion, we would love to hear from you.
Yes.
We would love to. Because I'm hoping that there are people out there, half of me hopes that there are people out there who enjoyed this so that somebody gets something out of it.
Right.
But the other half of me hopes that there are not people out there who enjoyed it so that there is no possible praise that can be given to these, so that someone can convince themselves that it worked.
Right.
So that someone can pull the wool over their eyes and go, "Up, I see Johnny's commentary over there. He liked the stories, so these were good." Because they weren't.
Nope.
And I don't want someone
Sorry, Johnny.
I just don't want someone to be able to convince themselves that they did good work here. Because they really didn't. They did not. But again, despite that strong language, still genuinely would love to hear counters to that. Because we're always interested in the opposite opinion. As we talked about, we've had some people bringing up possibilities of options, which are fair possibilities. I just think that they're very heavily outweighed by the negatives here. So yeah, I'm curious about any and all thoughts that you guys have in the comments below. Please let us know. And it's a good way. Amy, you and I sat here, and those of you out there that did as well, thank you so much for coming along on this crazy ride with us to read all 6 of these stories, because I think that it is some of the best examples of us and you showing off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
And hopefully we never have to do it this way again. We are definitely going to be back next week because, like I said, we've been getting the prequel stories, the Gathering Storm stories. And before you all click off, before you go away, there is one last thing that is extremely important. This Friday, believe it is the 14th, this Friday, the 14th,
I think so.
we of Geek for All, being Joe and Amy, are being hi, that's me. Are being sponsored by Wizards of the Coast as a featured content creator for MTG Arena. We thank Wizards so much for this opportunity. We thank the MTG Arena team for this opportunity, and we are going to be streaming this Friday. We've done that in the past, sponsored by Wizards as well, and you can check those out on our channel. They're very long, and we put up shorter versions as well, but we're going to be streaming this Friday starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, we're going to get home from work, we're going to have some dinner, and we're going to start streaming, and we're going to stop streaming at, well, who knows?
Whenever we can't go anymore.
Correct. And then we're going to collapse, and we're going to go to bed. But we are going to be here as long as we possibly can for your entertainment, and we are going to be doing a number of different things. If you didn't see our announcement video, I'm sure I'll put it here at the end for you to click on. It's like 2 minutes long, so feel free to check it out. We got packs. We got lots of packs to open.
Oh my gosh.
Lots of packs, which is awesome. And then we're going to probably do some drafts or some sealed, because we got some gems as well. Again, all of those, the packs and the gems, gifted by Wizards, and we thank them once again. And we will be those featured creators for all of you, starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Please make sure that you are subscribed. That button will be here. You can click on that, you can tap that, you can subscribe to the channel. It just sounds weird when you say tap that, but on a phone you don't click. It's just dirty. But anyway, yes, you can subscribe to our channel and you will find out when we go live. So please make sure that your notifications are on. Please make sure that you are following us on Twitter or Facebook or both. Those links to those are down in the description box below as well. Like I said, let us know any and all thoughts that you have in the comments.
Please, we'd love to hear something from you guys.
Anything
Just
at all.
anything.
Yes. And you guys have been doing an amazing job.
Any
who have
nugget
been,
from you guys would be better than these stories
by a lot.
by a lot.
Yeah. So thank you all so very much for hanging out with us for any and all of these that you did. And for now, from the Geek for All YouTube channel, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
Hopefully we see you guys on stream. And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.